Journalists Roundtable is a half-hour discussion with Pennsylvania journalists about the week's top political news and current events. Journalists Roundtable is a production of PCN, a nonprofit television network. Listeners like you make our programming possible. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Welcome to Journalists Roundtable. I'm Ellen France. Our guests today are Carmen Russell-Sluchansky, Multiplatform reporter with WHYY, Hallie Lauer, City Hall reporter with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and Carter Walker, reporter with Votebeat. Welcome, everyone. We're going to start with you, Carter. We're going to talk about some federal news that impacts Pennsylvania. The SAVE Act has recently passed the U.S. House and is now in the Senate to be voted on. What is this, and what impact would it have on elections here in Pennsylvania?
Right, so the SAVE Act is a pretty big bill that deals with mostly voter registration and voter ID requirements. Those are two of the main provisions. And what it would do is implement a photo ID requirement when voters go to the polls to vote. And it would also implement a documentary proof of citizenship requirement when they register to vote. These are two priorities that President Trump has been pushing for, not just in this term, but for a long time. And the impact that they would have if it were to pass, number one, of course, you'd have to show an ID, and not just any like a school ID, but a photo, driver's license, or thing like that to vote. And when you're registering to vote, you'd have to provide some kind of documentation proving that you're a U.S. citizenship. Both of those things are proposals that the American public, majority of them, do support. But specifically on the documentary proof of citizenship requirement, those are documents that not a lot of people have, or rather I should say there are a lot of folks that don't have a passport or a birth certificate or that kind of thing that could prove a barrier for them when they go to register to vote.
What have we heard from the U.S. Senate on how they may vote on this?
Well, right now it is currently being debated, as you said. Of course, we know they have a 60-vote threshold to end debate on an item and move it towards a vote. Right now there are not 60 votes for it in the Senate to do that, so it seems unlikely to pass, but of course, we're still watching it.
Now, Carmen, on February 20th, the United States Supreme Court ruled against President Trump's tariff power. What happened?
Well, so basically the Supreme Court decided that Trump could not unilaterally impose tariffs, the kinds of sweeping tariffs that he has actually been, imposing over the course of the first year of his administration, which he claimed that he could do under the Emergency Powers Act, right? And so the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. This is not an emergency. We're not. It's kind of like when Franklin Delano Roosevelt imposed tariffs on steel under the Emergency Powers Act. Well, we're not in a World War II situation, so that's basically what they said.
You write for a Philadelphia area news entity. What did you hear from the people of Philadelphia about this?
Yeah, well, I talked to some business owners, and they felt a lot of relief. So, for example, I talked to the CEO of a local pretzel, Pete. Pretzels, very popular in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, as you know. And their company actually focused a lot on the export market. Now, obviously, there's not, the U.S. doesn't apply tariffs on exports, but there were retaliatory tariffs that many countries actually put on products such as theirs. And also, he was saying that a lot of the ingredients that they use for their product, their pretzels, they actually have to import in. And so he said that the huge costs, initially 20% and more additional cost to their products, some of which they couldn't necessarily pass down to all of the purchasers.
U.S. Rep. Brian Fitzpatrick from Bucks County was the only Republican to celebrate this ruling. What caused his reaction?
Well, it depends on what the speculation is. So his office claims that he was always opposed to these tariffs to begin with, and there's evidence for that. Now, obviously, Fitzpatrick is in an extremely tight purple district, right? And so Democrats really believe that this is the chance that they have to unseat him. So he's constantly straddling a line between trying to appeal, make sure that he doesn't get on the wrong side of the president, while also ensuring that he is able to, keep the more middle ground of his district and keep a seat in this coming election in November.
Now that this tariff ruling has been overruled. What happens to the money that's already been collected from the tariffs?
Well, it's a good question. So typically what would happen if there was a tariff that was applied in error, what would happen is the companies who paid those tariffs would be able to go demand a compensation for it. However, as like the CEO of Pretzel Pete was saying, they didn't pay most of those tariffs directly, right? It was costs that were borne when they bought from their importers, right? There's like 3 different groups that end up paying additional costs for this, right? There's the actual importers who pay the tariffs directly, then there's the distributors, and then there's the company that buys from those distributors and so forth. So they didn't pay any of these tariffs directly, so they probably will not be able to actually get those. But let's say the importer can go back and say we should get compensation, and it's not entirely clear that even they will be able to do that, because was this a tariff that was applied in error? It wasn't like a miscalculation. This was, well, what the Supreme Court said was effectively an unconstitutional tariff. So that remains to be seen in the end.
Now, Hallie, Pittsburgh received funds from the federal government as part of the American Rescue Plan Act. What is the status of those funds?
So Pittsburgh has spent nearly all of those funds. They received about $335 million. As of the end of 2025, they had about $20 million left to spend. And all of that has to be spent per federal guidelines by the end of this year. City officials say that they feel really good and they're on track, and all of that money should be spent by the end of this year.
What are they putting that money towards?
So a vast majority of it in the early days of the pandemic went toward making sure that no city employees were laid off. They didn't have to cut any city services. But since then, they've really had a chance to explore a little bit. So they've designated a decent amount of funding to things like road paving and bridge maintenance. But they've also had the unique opportunity to kind of invest in things that normally wouldn't. So they replaced, thousands of Pittsburgh streetlights with these fancy LED lights that can actually go on a dimmer and like apply to the dark skies policy points to kind of help with light pollution. They actually paid into a program to help eliminate medical debt. They created a food justice fund to help food insecure people in Pittsburgh. So some of those programs, like the Food Justice Fund, it's not really clear what's going to happen to them next year when this funding expires. But it seems like all of the groups invested in that are really trying to make sure that those continue beyond the ARPA funding.
Now, Pittsburgh is hosting the NFL draft in the next few weeks. What impact will this have on the city's economy?
So the city's hoping it's going to be a pretty big one. It's interesting to kind of see, because aside from a couple different like amusement taxes and parking taxes, not a lot of the money is going to go directly to the city. A lot of it will be coming via, the impact to small businesses who are going to be there, like selling T-shirts, the restaurants, the bars that are nearby. The county will probably get a decent bump from the hotel tax, but it's really just, bringing in all of these people to Pittsburgh and seeing, what the city has to offer and shopping at the stores. And I think long-term city officials are hoping that some of these people who come visit for the draft end up, wanting to make Pittsburgh their home.
Now, switching topics to the state budget and also the city budget of Pittsburgh, Carter, you wrote about the Pennsylvania Secretary of Commonwealth Al Schmidt's budget hearing with the House. What concerns did lawmakers ask him about?
Yeah, well, these budget hearings can often be kind of a grab bag of what issues the legislature wants to address with the secretary while they have him there. I think 2 of the ones that stuck out in my mind were the status of the contract to upgrade our state's voter roll system. We have entered into a contract, $10.6 million, to upgrade the way we manage our voters, get them registered, how counties keep track of them. That's been underway for several years, but we didn't really get much of an update on when the release date of that new program will be. Some legislators asked if we were going to have it in time for the 2026 election, which the secretary said we weren't, but that's not very surprising since the plan was always not to have it in this year, but at least before the 2028 election. The other thing he got questions about was in this budget for next year, the state has $400,000 allocated for special election reimbursements when counties host a special election for state house or state senate. They get a reimbursement from the state for the cost of that. But it has been quite large in the past couple of years. I did a study calculation, and I saw that we had more special elections than any other state in the past 10 years, and it's cost us about $4.4 million. So legislators had questions about what can we do to reduce that? Should we be requiring these elections to take place on the already regularly scheduled elections rather than these random Tuesdays in March? Secretary didn't offer an opinion on that, but certainly something the legislature seems to be paying attention to.
Now, artificial intelligence is a big thing that's popping up in the news recently. What role does AI play in Pennsylvania's elections?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've been seeing a lot of campaigns use it in some of the statements they write, some of the videos they put out on their opponents. That's becoming popular here in PA as well as everywhere else. That Secretary definitely expressed some concern about. There's the risk, of course, of deliberate misinformation when you use AI, as well as just hallucinations, the AI getting something wrong, and you, of course, don't want that to happen in a campaign. He also seemed to indicate he thinks there's some potential for it to be a useful tool for elections, educating voters on what the rules are, what the dates are, but he's very cautious about it. He's saying, we can't possibly have a single instance of this of AI putting out false information about when the election is held or what the rules are if we are going to use it.
Hallie, speaking of budgets, Pittsburgh Mayor Corey O'Connor announced that he was reopening the city's 2026 budget. Why is he doing that?
So the city of Pittsburgh is in kind of a precarious financial situation right now, which they had kind of been expecting. When the pandemic hit, they had delayed some of their debt service payments to 2025 and 2026. So for years, they had been predicting last year and this year to be lean years. As Mayor O'Connor got into office earlier this year, his team started, digging into the budget a little bit more, and they, to quote them directly, said it was worse than they thought. So looking through it, they realized that things that they have to pay for, like employee health benefits and overtime pay, were significantly under budgeted for in an effort to make the budget look balanced. So they've reopened the budget and have submitted some amendments to kind of make the budget represent more realistically what they think they're going to be spending.
What could Pittsburgh do to make up some extra money?
That is the $1 million question. So City Council voted at the end of last year to increase the property taxes 20%. So, that's going to bring in about 28 million extra dollars. Unfortunately, the mayor's office is looking at probably an additional $30 to $40 million deficit, they said. In the budget amendments they recently presented, they are predicting finally like a net zero by changing around some of their projections for like payroll preparation tax, but they are going to have to dip into the fund balance, and so that's always a little bit worrisome. Beyond that, though, like it's really city officials are going to have to kind of find a way to grow the city and bring more people in, and sell more homes and get more people like to be living within the city limits to kind of help boost their revenues.
You wrote about how Pittsburgh is missing out on $4 billion worth of taxes due to the Big Five nonprofits being tax exempt. What are the Big Five?
So those would be UPMC, the University of Pittsburgh, Allegheny Health Network, Duquesne University, and Carnegie Mellon University, and they actually own the majority of the property in the city of Pittsburgh, but because they are nonprofit organizations, all of the property they own is tax exempt.
How long has this been going on in the city?
Oh, almost decades at this point. There for many mayoral administrations in a row, there's been attempts to try to, sue them into compliance, challenge their tax exempt status on various properties, work out a payment in lieu of taxes program. There at one point was a separate nonprofit set up that everyone could pay into that then the city could draw from, and that ended up being canceled. So it has been an ongoing problem in the city.
Does the O'Connor administration have a plan in place on how to address this?
So it seems like, off the bat, they've been a little bit more successful than maybe some past administrations. So far already, UPMC and then a foundation associated with PNC Bank have donated millions of dollars to the city to help them replace snowplows and ambulances. That doesn't solve the tax exempt problem, but it seems like this administration is opening up those roadways to kind of make those connections and work out what I think will ultimately end up being a form of a pilot, so a payment in lieu of taxes program. But, all of that still remains to be seen.
Carmen, you wrote about President Trump's accounts for kids. What are they?
Yes, the Trump accounts. The Trump accounts. This was a tax deferment program that was actually created in Trump's signature Big Beautiful Bill, H.R. 1 from last year. And ostensibly, the idea was a way to reduce inequality. So basically what happens is children who are born between last year and 2008, their parents can set up a so-called Trump account for them. I think it's 530A is what they call it. It's basically they can put in up to $5,000 tax-deferred contributions that can't be accessed until the child turns 18 years old. Now, the big real benefit here, I think, is the fact that the federal government is going to be putting $1,000, no strings attached money into those accounts when they're opened as well. They actually can, they request that after they open the account. So the idea is that obviously when these children turn 18 years old, they actually have a whole bunch of money. In fact, if they're maximized, if the, it could be up to $300,000 according to some estimates, like imagine turning 18 and suddenly having $300,000 at your disposal and so forth. And they can actually, keep that money in the account, bearing interest, and tax deferred up, throughout their lives actually. Now, of course, this was actually an idea that started back in, I think like 2010. There was a Duke economist who came up with this idea, and the idea was to reduce inequality. Now, of course, the $1,000 from the federal government helps, but critics say that it's not really going to reduce inequality because, families who are already, have the liquid funds to put up to $5,000. And by the way, employers can, parents and employers can also do this, grandparents. So there's other entities, other people who can put money in there as well. Well, they're the ones who can actually maximize. So it could potentially increase inequality because wealthier families could put more money and save more on taxes, whereas families who don't have that kind of discretionary spending, they can still maximize, they can still use the $1,000 and obtain the $1,000 and let that grow for a while.
Where are these funds going to come from the federal government?
Right from the coffers, right from the Fed. There's not like a particular bond or anything like that's being issued on this regard. But I should also note that I talked to some financial experts who were saying that even though it's not necessarily going to do what they're designed to do, they do really advise families to at least open the accounts, get the $1,000, and those that can maximum. Now, by the way, some even families who have more money that they could be putting in these accounts, there may be better options. If they have an extra $5,000 for that year, they may put it in the stock market or something like that, which actually receive more interest anyway. So.
Carter, you published an article this morning actually about Pennsylvania's automatic voter registration machines. Can you talk a little bit about how they work and how they affect the election process in Pennsylvania? Yeah,
so automatic voter registration, it's a process at the Department of Motor Vehicles, PennDOT, where when a person goes to get a license or an ID card, they're walked through the process of registering to vote. Prior to September of 2023, it was that when you went through this process, you were asked, would you like to register to vote? Now you're automatically taken through the process unless you opt out. The available data that the state has suggests it has increased our voter registrations, but what the data doesn't answer is, okay, well, where are these people registering? What areas of the states are benefiting? And are they actually voting now that they're registered? So we took a look at the voter rolls and found that a lot of the places that are seeing the biggest increases in registering their eligible but previously unregistered voters, a lot of that is in rural counties, which isn't surprising. Rural counties, people who don't live in a big city with a lot of public transportation probably have more need for a driver's license. But as might be expected, these folks don't vote as often as folks who register by other means. It's kind of a process that you're passively taken through as opposed to maybe somebody who registered by going down to their county elections office or registering online. They're taking some initiative to go and register to vote. So they tend to vote at higher rates, but still getting more people on the rolls, still leading to more people voting.
Now, Hallie, due to a partial government shutdown, there have been long lines at TSA at airports, and President Trump has sent in immigration enforcement to help out with this. One of the places that he sent them is the Pittsburgh airport. Have you heard about anything, how it's going with them on the premises?
Yeah, so Monday we found out that Pittsburgh Airport was going to be one of the places that these ICE agents were going to be at. And then Tuesday we started hearing reports and sending people out to see, these agents were there. It's not truthfully entirely clear at this point what exactly they're doing there. Reports we've been hearing from people at the airport is that they're there in body and kind of wandering around, but they're not taking your shoes or pushing the containers through the scanners at TSA. It doesn't seem like there's been any issues as of right now, so we're all hoping it kind of stays that way and just quiet. But yes, they are there. People are sending us videos of them walking around and being present and, just a general presence in the airport right now.
Carmen, you recently wrote about a panel of parents, students, along with Governor Shapiro and Attorney General Dave Sunday to discuss young people's usage of AI. What was the goal of this panel?
Can I give a public service announcement just quick on the last subject?
Yeah,
just
go
real
ahead.
quick for a second, because I want to make sure that people know that if they do want to open those 538 accounts that I was just talking about, they can go to trumpaccounts.gov and file tax form 4547 with their taxes, just because if anybody is interested in actually doing that. But yeah, so this panel was mostly to talk about issues with chats, those online chats, and how a lot of teenagers get talk to these chats, and sometimes to the detriment of their mental health. So, for example, the governor had said at this panel that he was saying that his team had actually engaged in one of these, and basically, acted as if they were a teenager and told the chat, it's like, well, I'm not, feeling well or whatever. And the chat eventually was saying something to the effect of like, well, as a licensed therapist and some, kind of weird stuff. So, that presented some red flags for the administration. The panel itself actually kind of diverged a bit because there were some parents there whose children had been affected by recent scandals in Pennsylvania high schools, in which other students had used AI to create, shall we say, scandalous pictures of their classmates and so forth. And so a lot of the conversation went to that. Now, whereas it looks like the state may be moving towards, there's some bills that basically prohibit children, minors, from engaging with chats. There are actually already rules, obviously, against producing these kinds of images. And in fact, Dave Sunday was there when he said that the Attorney General, he was saying that they've actually, with a couple of the teenagers in Lancaster County who had produced these images, they basically pled out to 59 charges. So we'll see. The sentencing, I think, is this week, so we'll see how that goes exactly. And there were a lot of other conversations about ways that students should be handling, minors should be handling, especially in school, dealing with this AI stuff. The governor brought up the possibility of a bell-to-bell ban of phones in the in schools and so forth. And it was interesting because there were like 5 students that were there, and they were saying things like, when I don't have my phone, I actually pay more attention in class and I feel better and so forth. But then in the end, when it came down to it, they said, but we don't like the ban, right? One of them said it was because I feel like it's a safety net, right? Like if something happens, I can call someone, I can call my mom if I'm alone and and I feel like in danger or something. And of course the governor said, well, that's it's kind of a shame that the students have to feel that way in this day and age.
Lastly, Carter, you wrote about multiple errors in elections out of Chester County. Can you talk about what happened?
Yeah, so last year during the November municipal elections, the county had printed its poll books, which are the big paper books that you sign into when you go to the polling place to vote. They had misprinted them without the third party and independent voters included, about 75,000 in that county. So those voters had to vote by provisional ballots, which can be a little bit riskier. The county eventually determined, it was simple human error that caused the problem, but that was compounded by the fact that they didn't have proper processes to catch that and rectify it before actual election day. So the county, hired a law firm to investigate how that happened. They say they came up with an action plan of changes they're making, which they say they're implementing. But just about that, when the scandal was at its conclusion there, we found out that the county had also, they had sent letters out to voters that it was a application to apply for a mail ballot for this year's elections, and the application had switched the voter's last name and first name. The county says the applications are still valid, but it was an example of another error that wasn't caught in the county. So unfortunately, it's been somewhat of a trend there in Chester County recently.
How much does it cost to fix these mistakes?
The poll book error, a cost wasn't ever officially determined. There, was no doubt some costs. They had to get more materials on election day. They quickly printed supplemental poll books. Of course, there was the cost for the investigation. The cost on the mistake that they made on the letters, they didn't have to reissue those letters. The state and the county said that they were still valid, so probably minimal to no cost there. But yeah, certainly errors always do increase the cost to some degree.
And what can the county do to prevent this from happening again?
Well, they say that they are taking the recommendations from the report, which were, having managers check some of these really important processes, having kind of 2 steps of verification, and they're implementing that going forward. They're going to do spot checks on the poll books when they're printed and they come back so that they can catch any errors ahead of time. That was part of the problem. They didn't actually check the materials they got before sending it out to the precinct. So they say they're going to do those kind of things, and hopefully that'll catch it.
All right, that'll have to be our last word. Our guests today have been Carmen Russell-Sluchansky, multi-platform reporter with WHYY, Hallie Lauer, City Hall reporter with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and Carter Walker, reporter with Votebeat. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
That's it for Journalist Roundtable. I'm Ellen France. Thanks for watching.
Full episodes of politics and policy content like the program you just listened to are available to stream with the PCN Select app. Discover other shows like the Capitol Preview, On the Issues, candidate interviews, and more. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.